Welcome to The Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today, finding out a little bit about their journey, the events that have helped shape their career, and maybe even diving into the things that still keep them up at night. Our guest today is the one and only Keren Elazari, a renowned security analyst, researcher, and the first Israeli woman to deliver a TED Talk. From her early days, inspired by the movie Hackers, a keen favorite of our guests on the podcast here, to becoming a leading voice in cybersecurity, Keren has been at the forefront of understanding hacker culture, researching emerging threats, and building inclusive communities in cybersecurity. So Keren, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, James. I'm super excited to be on the adventures of Alice and Bob.
Oh, that's great. Well, really appreciate you joining us today. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in technology in general and the world of cybersecurity.
Sure. So I was a very nerdy little girl. I had a lot of interests along the lines of electronics, technology, how the TV worked, how a lot of things worked. And in the early 90s, I got access to the internet and I had a computer of my own to play with. My school also had a computer lab and it gave me a lot of opportunity to explore. Now, as a child, I was always super curious, not just about technology. I was always the one asking the tour guide that extra hard question that they didn't know. At the museum, I was the one reading all the plaques and saying to her classmates, oh, guess what? This is super interesting. And running ahead to look at all the other artifacts and things you could see at the museum. That was kind of like my ideal day out, was to go to a museum. Such a curious little girl. So at some point, I asked my parents so many questions all the time. They realized that instead of fictional bedtime stories for kids, they could just let me read volumes of the encyclopedia. And back in the day, we had a super cool encyclopedia that had a lot of really cool diagrams and super interesting facts about the world. And it was also kind of randomly organized. It wasn't necessarily alphabetized. So I was just almost like when you go Wikipedia surfing. I don't know if people do that, but I do, where you just browse a random Wikipedia article and then you go to another one. And 3 hours later, you're down a very deep rabbit hole. I would do that, but just with entire volumes of the encyclopedia. And at some point I was done. And then the internet came along. And my parents realized that's perfect pastime activity for a curious 13-year-old girl. I had to teach myself first how the internet worked, how to connect, how to basically configure my modem. And then once I have my modem and it's plugged in and I've initialized it, what do I do now? Google didn't exist. A lot of other search engines didn't exist. Back in the day, we had some indexes. So these were kind of like how people experience the darknet today, where maybe it had one link that you would go to, and from there, maybe you'll get a few other links. So it was really kind of a classical exploration. And in that process, I had to teach myself sometimes how to get into all of those web pages that I was so curious about. And I had to teach myself how HTML worked and how the password protections on some of those websites worked. And from there, I realized how internet servers worked. And I just taught myself how to get to all of those places that had the information I was seeking. I didn't realize that some of those activities were perhaps considered less than legitimate. And James, don't hold it against me. Back in the day, we did not have a computer crime law here in Israel. So at least here locally, I was both a minor and I was within the context of the law. Although internationally, of course, that's not a valid argument. But it's been a while, so I think I can share those activities. And at some point, I got on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, and I got into some chat rooms with other people that were talking about using Linux as an operating system, and people that were teaching each other cool tricks and things that they were able to do. For example, overclocking their CPU to make it run faster. So hardware hackers, basically. And I was learning from these people. And at the same time, I was also learning how to build my hacker alter ego. Because I was a 13, 14-year-old girl from Tel Aviv, Israel. None of those facts were facts that I really wanted to be sharing online. So I had to teach myself how to chat in English with a hacker lingo, coming up with my alter ego personality. And very soon after I started getting interested in that, I stumbled upon the amazing movie Hackers that changed my life.
Well, before we go into the hackers thing, I think the nerdy side of things is really interesting because doing the research for this, and I'd love to know if this is true, I found out that you were potentially so nerdy as a child that the local Dungeons and Dragons team thought you were too nerdy to actually join them.
Yeah, so that is a true story. And it wasn't just the local group. These were kids in my class. And I saw them at break kind of drawing up characters for their D&D campaign. And I was like, what's that? That looks so cool. Can I join? And they were like, no, you cannot join our group. You're not cool enough to join our group. Thankfully, I got cooler friends since then whom I can play Dungeons and Dragons with, and lots of other games. So I'm also into different games. And I'm actually in a spaceship simulator LARP these days, which is kind of cool. A lot of fun. I really love science fiction. I'm super inspired by space. I have a ton of comic books and space sci-fi books here on my shelf as well. So I think I was really lucky, though those kids didn't want me to play with them. I was super lucky to be inspired by an imaginary world and by the multitude of imaginary worlds that the internet represented for me. So that was kind of a lucky break, I guess.
And you mentioned as well, there's that idea of, you're a 14-year-old girl growing up in Tel Aviv, very into some very nerdy topics, seeking out lots of information. What was that process like of discovering your identity online and actually building this alter ego that, well, you say it's an alter ego, but I'd say it's probably your ego now. It's what people know you for. There's an image that, if you look across your presentations from the past 10, 15 years, you're very recognizable in your image, your portrayal and everything like that. How quickly did you find yourself building that, and what was that process like?
I think I really was very lucky to grow up in Tel Aviv in the mid-90s in a period of time where a lot of cultural influences just came to my life at the same time that I was interested in technology, at the same time that I was being nerdy. I was also pretty lucky to be encouraged by my parents to grow up at a school that had a computer lab. One year we had a robotics lab, which was kind of like a pilot project that the school got funded for somehow. So I had a lot of avenues to explore, and I was motivated to explore these things, despite the fact that maybe socially I was not the coolest kid, in the classroom or the coolest kid on the block. I had a couple of other kids that I knew that were a little bit also into computer games, and I would hang out with them. And at some point, I'd just go out after school and just spend time at the local computer store. And the year I graduated from high school, I got a job there because I was just spending so much time at the store. It made sense for them to pay me. At least that's what I told them. And that's how it worked out. So growing up, it's such an influential point. It's such a crucial point for so many people where they decide what they want to do or who they want to be. And I kind of knew I wanted to deal with information, to deal with technology. But then really the movie Hackers showed me this is a thing. It's called Hackers. And hackers wear super cool leopard pink jackets and vintage fashions. And they listen to this cool music and they're like subversive and underground. But ultimately, they're also heroes for good if they decide to be. So that was something that I was reading up on, when I was reading like Choose Your Own Adventure books and Dungeons and Dragons books or Dragonlance books. And there were parties of groups and heroes, and everybody had their different skill sets. And sometimes they'd be aligned for the same goal or cause. Sometimes they'll be a little bit more chaotic. When I saw the movie Hackers, this is the vision that I wanted to become my reality. And I'm very grateful that it worked out. Honestly, I don't know. Probably I'd be a tour guide or a museum docent if being a hacker didn't work out as a career.
With the hacks thing, it was very, very much of its age, like you say. It portrayed hackers in this wonderful kind of colourful punk alternative scene. There were some good female characters in it as well, breaking from some of the other things where it was, things like war games where it was, male protagonist sat tapping at a keyboard. It was people out, partying, rollerblading, and kind of doing all sorts of fun things whilst hacking computers with kind of this hack the planet, like we can make a difference in the world message.
Yeah.
Obviously that builds, an image in your head of what the community could be like. But what was the reality like? Because obviously you said you went on to get a job in a computer shop locally and all that kind of thing. in those early days, there's the portrayal of hackers in the movies, but not necessarily the career path there are today. So how did those two marry up in your world?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I think the mid-90s actually showcased a few popular media Hollywood portrayals that were kind of cool. So Hackers came out in 1995. The Net with Sandra Bullock, if you remember that. Matrix, 1999. There were, quite a few of these cyberpunk-ish inspired films, whereas War Games, which was super influential for its day and allegedly even influenced the changes in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the United States, because the President Reagan saw the movie and said, oh my God, we have to come up with rules against hackers like that. When I was growing up, it was more the cultural aspect and the diverse cast and Hackers. The fact that it wasn't just that Angelina Jolie was such an incredibly powerful leading character. In my mind, she was, the leader of the group. The group had a kid who was maybe non-binary. They went to like different clubs, very alternative. It had a lot of this alternative lifestyle thing, which for me as a girl too nerdy to be on the D&D team was very, very attractive, this idea that actually you can be so weird, you become super cool. And that's something I kind of doubled down on. And to this day, I'm very proud to have my friends being, misfits and geeks and weird people with esoteric hobbies. And I think that's something that when it became when I reached a point in my life where it was more about, okay, what am I going to do for a career, for a job? The day I graduated high school, I just marched down to that local computer store and said, you should give me a job because I spent so much time here and I know about all this hardware and stuff, more than most of the people you hire. And they were like, well, we never had a girl working here and we never had a high school girl working here. Everybody here is like 20-somethings. But we'll give you a chance and we'll see if it works out. And it worked out well. I proved to everybody that would walk in that store immediately underestimated me because I was young, because I was a girl. They guessed I wouldn't know what, they're talking about. And I did. I knew everything. And I taught myself everything. I knew everything. And one day a group of kids came in and they started talking to me about overclocking their CPUs. And I was like, yeah, you guys hackers, what's up? And they were like, yeah, and we're going to this hacker conference and it's in a couple of weeks. Maybe, maybe you should check it out. And I was like looking up information about this event and it was sold out because it was kind of small. But I figured out I'm still going to make it there and I volunteered. So by the way, hacker listeners, pro tip from me to you, if you want to go to your favorite hacker conference and the tickets are sold out, volunteering is one of the best ways to be a part of the community, to give back, to learn, to meet people. It's actually a way more fun way to be a part of an event than, just sitting in the back row listening to talks. So I did that. I volunteered at that event and I showed up. It was 200 guys, me, and the lady who was running the event. And that one lady there, by the way, shout out Neo, that was her handle before or right around the year Matrix came out, actually. Neo gave me a chance as a volunteer. And she also showed me, even if it's a room with 200 guys, there's one lady here, then I can be the second lady there and I can change it. And today, I think we're seeing that change happening. And I'm proud to contribute to that change in all of my different activities. I think we're saying that, it would be a much more rare occasion for a young person to show up at a hacker event and only see 200 guys and not a single girl. And I'm hopeful that anybody who wants to be a part of our world, a part of the information security, cybersecurity ecosystem, feel comfortable that they show up to an event, maybe like B-Sides. The Security B-Sides network of events are the fantastic first place to start. Check it out. Look for one in your local neighborhood. I know there's more than 10 B-Sides in the UK alone, so definitely.
Yeah, we've got some great B-Sides over here.
Yeah, I just had the chance to participate in B-Sides London in mid-December. It was fabulous. So I think this is part of what helped me turn my passion into a professional reality, because I showed up and I saw there were all these people that were into this stuff, and they're not just online, they're physically coming to a conference to learn from one another. At midnight, there was a screening of Hackers. The next night, there was a screening of War Games and Sneakers. Everybody was so into it. I felt like I belonged, finally. After all of those years being a weird kid or a too nerdy kid, I found my tribe. It's all of these hackers around the world that I just haven't met before. They're my best friends. So it worked out. And in terms of turning it into a professional career, well, as things were, I grew up in Israel. So when I turned 18, it was my time to join the army. And I had to show up on a specific date and time and, get my uniform, get my picture taken, and let the military service commence. And I was, again, quite privileged in that moment to be able to just repeatedly say to every officer, every director that I was getting interviewed by, I'm a hacker. Let me work on hacking things for the army. Send me in the right direction. Show me where your servers are. Take me to your firewall. And I feel like 20-something years ago, the Israeli army knew what to do with me, whereas maybe other militaries wouldn't know what to do with somebody who came in and basically said, I have a subversive tendency to break systems. So here in Israel, I think there is a mindset where that kind of knowledge, that kind of capability is sometimes put to good use. Okay, I'll say that again. Here in Israel, I think we do have that. Okay, let's just, I'll say something else because I kind of got lost in what I was trying to say.
No, it's a great point around, the forward thinkingness in the Israeli army. They've obviously led in a lot of cyber research, a lot of exercise, a lot of developing tools and capabilities. I'm curious, like with yourself coming up as this kind of hacker kid, heavily influenced by the film Hackers, there's very much anti-authoritarian vibes going on in that film. How does that play out in even a forward-thinking military unit where it's very hierarchical and you're part of, an agent of the state effectively, versus the sort of often seen as the anarchic hacker community? How did those two things balance?
So that's a great question, James. And I'll tell you, it wasn't without its difficulties. But I think really having a very clear conviction that I know what I'm talking about and I can show them, and the army having, in some places, the flexibility to understand there are some skill sets that we can put to good use, even though there's maybe some subversive tendencies. So I'm not going to lie, there were some points in my service where I did show up dressed up as a punk and not wearing my uniform. And I somehow was able to get away with that. And I think that is, again, a very unique quality to our ecosystem here, because being disruptive, challenging the norm, challenging assumptions, it's kind of something that really defines the ecosystem in Israel. It's also one of the reasons you see a ton of disruptive startups come out of here, because it is celebrated. And whilst the army is a very strict system, as all militaries are by definition, our army is based on the mandatory service principle. So every 2 or 3 years, you get that evergreen generation of people that just finished doing 2 or 3 years of work on cybersecurity things or on other technology challenges, and now they're released into the wild, and new people are going to come in. So the army gets pretty good with kind of harnessing that flow and working with people that are very different and that come from very different backgrounds. And that's another really cool thing. It's a melting pot culturally. So you get to meet people who didn't grow up in Tel Aviv and have a robotics lab or, access to a computer lab in their school or at their home. And yet they taught themselves everything they knew because they would repair people's computers for a living to help their families. And that's how they got to be hackers. Different skill sets, different backgrounds, but you get to work with amazing people that all have this one thing in common: super passionate about technology, super curious about what is possible, what can be done, not just what we are told that can be done. It's not just like a read-only mentality. That's the 5, you read it, that's it, right? It's always striving to modify the settings, modify the requirements of the system and get it to do something different. And I had that mindset, and I got to work with people who had that mindset. So that's how pretty much the first week when I was done with my service, I started getting calls from people within that network who said, well, we heard you're done with your service. We want to offer you a job. And I think this is another point, because a lot of people that age would then maybe pursue an academic education. or a professional diploma of one type or another. And for me, I was in a dilemma whether I want to go that traditional route, go take a computer science degree, spend 3 or 4 years studying computer science and engineering, buy the book, like study all the math, everything, or just jump right in and start doing things in the real world. And I kind of did both because I'm that kind of person. I tried both. I started a job at a network operations center and I started a computer science degree. And halfway through that, I realized that I can learn a lot more in the real world. And I realized that the industry, and I think this is even truer today than it was back in my day, the industry moves so fast. Cyber criminals innovate so fast that if you really are focused on cybersecurity and you want to be a hacker for good, maybe spending 3 years in a university is almost a setback. I'm sharp words, I know, them fighting words, especially since I am today a researcher at a university and I spent many years collaborating with different universities around the world. But definitely in the age of AI, I think it's something we need to think about in terms of where people get their information, where people get their education, where they build their skill sets. Certainly, there are some things that you can learn at university, but you can't pause time and you can't pause what's happening in the real world. And one of the reasons I love cybersecurity so much is that every week there's something new. There's a new capability, a new exploit, a new technique. Criminal gangs, they are like the phoenix. They rise from the ashes. They are taken down by law enforcement. They reinvent, they rebrand, they come back with something else. The last couple of years, I think we've experienced a ransomware renaissance, not to give it too grandiose a term, but really ransomware is such a successful criminal business model. And because of that, criminals are super motivated to continue elaborating on that model, to innovate on it, to come up with new techniques, with new practices, with new tools all the time. And until companies stop paying ransoms, that's not a business model that's going to go away. In fact, I think last year, 2024, there was a single ransomware payment of $75 million. A single payment. By the way, a Fortune 10 company. So not a Fortune 500 company, one of the 10 companies in the Fortune 10 list. And one of the reasons you haven't heard about that is because that's the reason the company paid. They paid the ransom because they didn't want anybody to know that they were hit with ransomware. And for a company that makes hundreds of billions of dollars, the decision was that $75 million to pay the hackers was okay. And that's something we also need to discuss in our industry, I think, whether that is cool or not. And,
Well, yeah, there's like many things to unpick there. I think, let's dive into a little bit about your tracking of ransomware threat actors, because the techniques, like you say, are constantly evolving. They're constantly rising from the ashes. But a lot of the way organizations think about them is they almost assume that it's still that one ransomware threat actor doing the end-to-end. They do all the campaign, they manage it all. They just, come in to encrypt files locally. They don't realize all the different ways that the threat actors are now monetizing either encrypted data at rest or just preventing you from accessing data that exists, blocking off systems.
Or threatening to leak your data to everybody else, right?
Exactly. So how is that evolving and what are people not factoring in their resiliency there?
So I definitely think the lone hacker is almost a myth when it comes to ransomware. There are some lone hacktivist hackers out there. There's at least one I know of that recently pulled a pretty big data leak on a huge corporate. I'm not going to name and shame the company or the hacker, but it's I'm almost confident people heard about that in the news, although the identity of the hacker has been revealed and the hacker claimed to be a group, but it is kind of an open secret in the hacker community that it is a single individual. But that individual didn't pose any monetary request. They didn't extort that multi-billion-dollar corporate for money. They just straight up leaked their files because of an ideology or because of hacktivism, basically. With that said, when it comes to ransomware, From my knowledge tracking ransomware operations, it is absolutely an ecosystem of cyber criminals, and it includes multiple developers. It includes initial access brokers who serve as the people who gain access into an organization, who sell cookies or session tokens or sometimes usernames and passwords and credentials, and they just farm and harvest these and sell these on to ransomware gangs. And as many people might know, ransomware is also evolved in recent years to a more accessible form of cybercrime, ransomware as a service. So there's a core gang of developers and technical people who write the actual payload, the actual ransom code, and they set up cloud infrastructure to support lower level criminals or different types of criminals who are going to be the ones doing the groundwork, getting that access, deploying that ransomware in an organization, running the negotiations. By the way, somebody created a ransom GPT. So somebody created a plugin to ChatGPT trained on ransomware negotiations. And those criminals will use tools like that. They'll basically use cloud setups to also exfiltrate a ton of data from organizations. And then the threat is not just pay us or you won't see your data back. It's pay us or everybody else will see your data, which is the double extortion model. And in some ransomware gangs like Clop and other ones, it's the triple extortion threat. Pay us or we will reach out to your partners, your customers, your employees, and we're going to pressure them to pressure you to pay us. It goes on and on. There's other forms of innovation there as well. It's certainly not a lone individual. And these ransomware operators, they are super adaptive at taking advantage of technologies that are very popular in the enterprise space. So from remote monitoring tools and software, from data transfer, file transfer software, coming up with ransomware versions that will specifically encrypt VMware, ESXi, hypervisors. So it's not just, plain old ransomware for your Windows and client machines. This is ransomware that can basically lock down infrastructure, servers for an entire business. Case in point, the attacks on MGM and Caesars Entertainment in late 2023. Within 1 week, AlphaV or Black Cat, a ransomware group, collaborated with a group sometimes referred to as Scattered Spider to gain access into the data centers and basically the most critical applications for both Caesars Entertainment and MGM. Both of those companies made different choices. Allegedly, Caesars negotiated from the 30 million ransom to a 50 million ransom. MGM declined to pay the ransom. To date, the cost of that attack, according to their own reports, their own claims for insurance assistance or remittance, etc., 150 million. So 10 times more because they didn't pay the ransom. And this ties back to the original statement I made, James. Ransomware works because the business model works for criminals. And as long as companies keep paying, ransomware operators are going to keep coming up with clever ways to make it work. They're going to keep up innovation. Ransomware now, like Black Hat, is written in Rust, which is a relatively new programming language that's also not as easily detectable. So a lot of security tools won't really know how to parse malware that's written in Rust. They employ things like intermittent encryption, which means they don't encrypt the entire file system or the entire file, only segments of the file. The encryption process runs a lot faster. It's a lot more evasive. Again, a lot of security tools and EDRs don't necessarily know that that's a ransomware operation when they see that kind of partial encryption taking place, whereas a full system encryption is a pretty clear signal that a lot of detections can now kind of come up with. So that's what I'm saying, James. We are dealing with a ransomware renaissance, I think, in our industry, and it is fueled by the fact companies keep paying the ransom. I do applaud MGM for their choice. I don't think a lot of other organizations would have made a similar choice given the circumstances.
I mean, it is a truly fascinating world to look into because I think a lot of people don't realize it mirrors the world of legitimate security or just general software vendors, where we've seen the trend from kind of these on-prem standalone applications into SaaS. And we've seen exactly the same with the threat actors, where it's no longer this payload deployed in email. They're linking into identity systems. They, like you say, taking dumps of tokens and browser information to log in as a user and perform actions. It's all done as a service. And of course, that's driven by the huge figures you've talked about, the dollar value, the market that is out there that they can tap into very easily with dedicated platforms and all this side of things. So
I do want to highlight just in the last few months, we have seen some very successful law enforcement action against Black Cat and against Lockbit, who are probably the two biggest perpetrators of a ransomware and maybe made the ransomware as a service model so popular in the last couple of years. So the leaders of those groups are on the run or hiding, but there's also been an arrest. There's been an arrest here in Israel, which I don't think a lot of people know, of somebody who's been indicted, or I guess they are waiting to be extradited from Israel to the United States for their role as one of the core developers of Lockbit. So that is some significant progress, I guess. There's also a really cool project called No More Ransom. I'd like people to know more about. Again, an international collaboration. And on No More Ransom, nomoreransom.org, I believe is the URL, you can, firstly, you can find decryptors for many of the popular ransomware variants. And these are being constantly developed and shared by organizations such as the Japanese Cybercrime Police Force and researchers working in the Netherlands and from really all over the world. As soon as they can write decryptors for these ransomware variants, they're sharing them on No More Ransom. But there's also a call and a pledge for companies to kind of speak up and say, we're not going to pay ransom. And that's something I also think we need to encourage.
Absolutely. Then that point is something that very much divides people in the community often, that we have this kind of message of you shouldn't pay the ransom. Nobody should ever pay the ransom. Yet we see businesses paying out for ransom. We sometimes see cyber insurers paying out for ransom as long as you've ticked certain boxes and met certain standards that they do there. So it's one of those things, how do we actually, if we can stem the flow of money, then we stop the phoenix from rising again? Do you think that's actually something we can legitimately do in this day and age?
Well, firstly, again, I want to highlight the success of law enforcement organizations and international collaborations in tracking down and stopping at least some of the activities of the main Black Cat and Lockbit gangs. That's not something to be trifled with after a couple of years where they basically made millions, if not billions. Further to that, I think we also need to encourage active research on the mechanisms of how they get paid, how they move, how they fund their operations, how they funnel their money around. And I want to highlight the fact that there's not a ton of people that are experts at cryptocurrency forensic research. The reason we know about that $75 million ransom that I mentioned is because a single researcher was able to track it on the blockchain and kind of highlight to people on X, the site formerly known as Twitter, and say, hey, here's the research I did. I'm pretty sure this is malicious threat actor group known as Dark Angels, and I'm pretty sure the company that they got paid by is Company X. I won't mention them, but this kind of skill set is really important. So I also want to highlight to people that fighting ransomware is not just about fighting the malicious payload or coming up with detections for specific code that might be running or shutting down the vulnerabilities that these bad guys are exploiting. It's also about understanding the financial and criminal ecosystems that allow It's also about understanding the financial and criminal ecosystems that basically allow ransomware to thrive. And I also believe we're seeing more guidance from governments and regulators that are basically saying, here's our stance on ransomware. It's a little bit too late, but it's still impactful, where a government or a regulator says paying ransomware is not a legitimate legal expense, for example. It's not something that you should be doing. I do think the insurance companies are part of this equation and they need to be part of the discussion, whether they like it or not. And I've told them that myself whenever I had a chance.
I think listening to you, one of the things that comes across, just in your answer to the how do we solve for ransomware, but also in some of the talks, we've seen you do online, are a lot of people think about hacking and cybersecurity in silos. They think in terms of technologies, data, electronics, or mathematics and cryptography. But when I listen to you talk about these topics, you're thinking of the bigger picture. What's kind of going on? What are the underlying motivations? What are the parts hackers play in society? And back to, the TED talk you gave around 10 years ago, like how do we build that cybersecurity immune system as a kind of collective culture of security professionals and actually regular people? So, what do you think the importance is of hacker culture and building that immune system?
Wow, I am such a believer in the power of hackers to actually bring about positive, transformative change. In 2014, I shared my TED Talk with the idea that sometimes hackers can be part of that global immune system. Today, I believe we need to build our own digital immune system, each and every individual, definitely in the age of disinformation, in the age of generative AI. And this is something that I always bring up to people when people ask me, will AI replace me, right? Or will AI replace cybersecurity professionals? I think there's always going to be room for people who can outsmart the machines. That's hackers. There's always going to be a need for that. And there are always going to be malicious people who know how to outsmart the machines for their own benefit. So we're going to have to continue building our global capacity to learn, to share. This is why I love hosting B-Sites Tel Aviv and being part of Security B-Sites. Every time I participate, that I go to DEF CON globally, the world's largest hacker convention, I see such incredible potential, curiosity, knowledge, collaboration. It gives me so much hope. Despite the fact that criminals are successful, despite the fact that AI is eating software and creating bugs along the way, this is maybe now is actually a good time for people to study computer science and to study programming. You know why, James? Because with generative AI and with no code or low code platforms replacing so much of programming and programmers using so much AI to help them do what they do, we run a risk of evolving into kind of like a matrix-like reality where there's actually not a lot of people that understand what the code is doing. Not a lot of people that know, why the AI made that decision. Why is the agent doing this or that? So we need more Neos and Trinities and Morpheus, right? We need more people that can actually understand what the heck is going on in this AI-centered world. So actually now is a good time to study programming and to study computer systems and engineering and understand the fundamentals. It's actually very interesting because a few years ago, I would tell you AI is going to replace programmers. There's no need, you can learn C++, but why? Why go through that? Save yourself the hassle. Now, actually, my mind has changed about that. Part of building our immune system for the future is making sure that we can also cultivate the skill sets to challenge AI, to challenge technology, to still have the human capacity to outsmart the machine, to understand what the machine is doing. And I hope people decide to do that. It's really, the choice is individual. We all have to decide whether we want to grow up or whether we want to live and maybe grow old and have a very easy life in a world where the matrix takes care of everything for us and we don't really know how it works, but it works. Or if you want to take the red pill and then life becomes a little harder.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, we've come a long way in many ways since the movie Hackers, right? But in other ways, things are very stuck. There's very set media portrayals around what a hacker is, and it's usually a bad guy, and it's usually something going wrong. And often we'll see people performing actions within the hacker community that are at the time seen as highly controversial, but often later get recognized as actually that was an act of good faith. That held a mirror up to that challenge, that abuse of freedom, that unpatched system, whatever it was. How do you think we can, what do you think the responsibility of our community is for helping people understand the motives and the portrayal of the kind of hacker community?
Yeah, so people so often overestimate the capacity of hackers, but underestimate our ethics and our motivations. And I think Hollywood really plays into that. And we stand on the shoulder of giants. I think in our hacker community, it's also important to celebrate the works and the actions of people like Dan Kaminsky, like Barnaby Jack, like Kevin Mitnick, all three hackers who are no longer with us, unfortunately, who have passed away in recent years. And all three of them have pushed the envelope in one way or another, showcasing vulnerabilities. In the case of Kevin Mitnick being the most wanted hacker and serving prison time for his actions. In the case of Dan Kaminsky, heroically showing the world that there are fundamental security problems with DNS, the protocol that so much of the internet works on. And in the case of Barnaby Jack, highlighting vulnerabilities in medical devices in a way that was considered very antagonistic at the time, but so crucial for everything that's happened after that, and for a wake-up call, really, for the medical device industry and the cybersecurity community to realize all of those vulnerabilities. So we do need to remind ourselves of these actions, seen as controversial or even scary at the time, leading eventually to an evolution, demanding something better, creating something better. And we spoke so much about the movie Hackers. I also want to share a more personal story about that, if I may, James, something I haven't spoken that publicly about. About 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to a camp of cool people gathering over a weekend somewhere in Northern California without any set agenda. And the whole idea was come up with ideas, talks, demos, code, hack, whatever you want. And around the time, it was the 20th anniversary of the film Hackers. So I came up with a project to film a fan version of the movie Hackers, with all the cast and the crew being actual real-world hackers. And I was very lucky to have Dan Kaminsky agree to play the lead role in the movie, the role of Crash Override or Zero Cool. And I had the support of some incredible people helping create that film. And it was never really published. So perhaps when the podcast goes live, we can share the film, the private link for people to view it in honor of Dan Kaminsky and the many hackers who contributed to that short fan version of the movie Hackers. It is coming up on the 30th anniversary of that film. And I really do credit it with my career choices, my life choices. And I think that there is an entire generation of security professionals that owes their career choices to that film. So I'd love to share the small fan version that we made and to celebrate the life and the work of Dan Kaminsky, who participated in it.
We would absolutely love to be able to share that because, yeah, it's a fantastic film. It's a fantastic tribute you paid there. And I believe there was, like you said, there was a number of people from people like Dan Kaminsky, in the hacking scene, to other people in tech like Cory Doctorow and others, Ken Thompson in there, helping you recreate these scenes. So maybe actually you could just explain a little bit about, given you had this location in Northern California, you'd come up with this idea. How do you recreate a Gibson mainframe?
So we were super lucky. There was a lady there whose specialty is coming up with 3D visualizations. And basically over the course of a few hours, she just sat down and coded something on her laptop that we were able to project on cardboard boxes. And then that was kind of our environment for the Gibson that we, the group of hackers, were getting into. And there were some really, really cool people involved with that project. You'll have to watch the whole thing and then the credits, because there are a ton of cameos. Some science fiction authors are in there, more than one. Some people who basically are creators of the Unix operating system are in there. A lot of really core people in the cryptography world agreed to be a part of this movie, on screen and behind the camera. It was basically a hacker project, wrangling all these people, running around with a small video camera, filming under desks and in abandoned conference rooms, and during basically people sitting out at camp doing barbecue, and we were running around trying to recreate different sessions, listening to the amazing soundtrack of Hackers to get us in the zone and in the mood. So I do hope people watch it and enjoy it. It was a lot of fun to make, and it was a labor of love.
Hackers hacking hackers, what's not to like? It sounds wonderful, and really looking forward to being able to see that, because there's some great things, and it's had a real influence. A lot of my team actually, we have the little Hack the Planet pins on the pager and all this kind of stuff.
Love it.
It's just something that resonates culturally with a lot of people in the scene.
Absolutely. Hack the planet.
Hack the planet, indeed. Yeah, actually, on a Teams chat early today, I was using the meme, so it does come up quite regularly. Just thinking of those reference points, one of the things in your TED Talk, which I really enjoyed, and we'll put a link again in the description for people who haven't seen it, is you had a wonderful quote from the late Barnaby Jack there, that it was that sometimes you have to demo a threat to spark a solution. Maybe you could just explain, like what that means to you, because I know you used it right up front to kind of set the scene in that talk.
I think it's a really powerful statement by Barnaby, and he was antagonistic. He would demo threats to spark solutions. His research into medical devices, and prior to that into hacking ATM machines and a lot of other connected devices, was often seen as dangerous, careless, or really kind of risky. But I think there's a really strong message here. Sometimes it is up to hackers to force a solution by demonstrating a threat where there aren't any aligned interests to fix a problem. The only way to get the problem to be fixed is by basically taking over people's attention and shining a spotlight and saying, hey, check it out. It's really bad. It's really broken. We got to do something fast. And I think we've seen this over the last decade, I think with a lot of car hackers, actually. A lot of people working in the automotive cybersecurity industry, basically showcasing pretty remarkable capabilities. Just recently, I saw a hacker talk about how he used a Starlink connection to remotely connect into Subarus and different types of Subarus. And that researcher did it on his own car and then a friend's car with their permission. And I also want to highlight the fact that Tesla, a very important company in so many ways, Tesla changed the language in some of their ownership agreements to state that if you are in good faith hacking on your Tesla and you bricked it, you have not voided the warranty by doing that. And I think that's remarkable. I also remember Elon Musk coming to DEF CON to meet with hackers and bringing his heads of engineering for SpaceX and for Tesla. Now, I know in recent years, Elon has become a very controversial figure in so many ways, but at least on the cybersecurity front, I think he's the type of leader that realizes the potential hackers represent. That's not to say I condone or endorse any of his other messages, certainly not political messages, but I do want to highlight the fact that, certain automotive companies and certain industries can stay in the past, very conservatively thinking, our systems are protected by firewalls, and we've got an air-gapped data center or whatever. And hackers are just going to walk all over those assumptions and showcase the wrongness in them. And this is the one thing I want people to take away. The only constant is change. And hackers are often the bearers of that change. They're on the forefront. They're on the avant-garde. And even if it's criminal hackers, we got to learn from what they're doing. We can't afford to just ignore it and say, well, it's just a criminal edge case. That's not going to affect us. That's not going to affect me, or that's not going to affect my industry or my company. I think that would be a wasted lesson, a wasted opportunity. So, when Barnaby said sometimes you have to demo a threat to spark a solution, I agree. But further to that, I think we got to research the threats. We got to understand how the bad guys are using things so that we can prepare solutions before before really catastrophic things happen.
Absolutely. It's that engaging with positive intent and understanding why people are trying to expose these threats. Because, I've seen it personally where you've been working with a company and said, there's this vulnerability, and they'll say, well, you shouldn't have done that. The EULA says you can't do that. Right? But the EULA is not going to stop someone exploiting this and weaponizing it. So why don't we collaborate on how to solve this? And people often have that very fixed mindset of, well, we've said you can't touch that, so stay away. And actually, sometimes you need people who are willing to push those boundaries, to shine a light on it, to draw it to society's attention, especially with things like medical devices, like cars. You can't hide the security of those behind some legal agreement and then say, well, the hacker shouldn't have crashed the car.
Yes, that's right. An organization that I've supported in recent years called I Am the Cavalry has done a lot to promote a conversation about how to safely engage with security researchers on things like that, with medical devices, with cars, with critical infrastructure. And I also want to highlight the fact that today, 10 or 11 years almost after my TED Talk, bug bounty programs are way more popular. So many organizations have learned that they can harness the power of security researchers. There is a standard, an international standards organization, an ISO, for coordinated vulnerability disclosure. If you work at a big company and your company does not have a policy around how to engage with security researchers, about how to receive vulnerability disclosures. Maybe you don't work with a bug bounty platform, that's fine, but at least have some sort of policy in place. There's another project called security.txt. I don't know if you've heard about that, James. So having a file called security.txt somewhere on your internet-facing systems that has the information on, hey, if you found this file and you found something that's wrong and you want to report it to us, here's how you do it. Don't make life harder, because for a security researcher, it's a lot easier to just, pop into Discord or X or the darknet somewhere and say, hey, I found this cool thing. Why don't you guys play with it? You want to make it easy for them to reach out to you and say, hey, I found this cool thing. Why don't you patch it before somebody decides to play with it, right? Make it easy for hackers to reach out to you, not harder. This is definitely a recommendation.
So we spent a lot of time, we're almost out of time now, but we spent a lot of time talking about the hacking community, the scene, all the things around that. What do you think we need to do as a wider society to increase our cybersecurity immunity that you've talked about previously?
So certainly when I take the larger perspective, I am a very big proponent of feminism and equality. And I think increasing gender diversity in the technology ecosystem, and specifically in cybersecurity, is something that can do a lot of positive impact. I spend about 30% of my time focusing on things like the leading Cyber Ladies Network, which is a global network with professional meetups for women in cybersecurity, and things like B-Sites TLV that I mentioned, but also the Hacker Riot Initiative, which is new. We started it 2 years ago here in Tel Aviv, which is all about making that first cybersecurity job more accessible to younger individuals, specifically to younger women who may not even know what a job in cybersecurity means, how they need to prepare for that, what are the different career paths that are accessible to them. So I do think we need more humans. I don't think the cybersecurity workforce is going to be built on AI alone. Yes, if you are a CISO of a company, you can use AI to help you maybe reduce some of the gaps in headcount that you have, or maybe make more with the technologies that you currently have. But I do feel like we need to basically crank out more humans. So bring more humans up to speed into the cybersecurity ecosystem, and with the mindset of understanding what the AI is doing, right? Like we spoke about earlier, James. So we need more people that can understand what AI is doing, and people who can challenge AI on what it's doing. And we need people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. As an ecosystem, as a cybersecurity ecosystem, I think we need to collaborate more, engage more with newcomers, help them find their path into the industry, help them find their passion so that they can continue seeing it in the same eyes that we do, that every week there's something new. So this is my own passion, to share it with people so that more young individuals decide that cybersecurity is a career for them. More mature individuals decide that they want to stay in cybersecurity despite burnout. So these are things we got to work on.
That's a wonderful thought for the future, and definitely something I think every organization, everyone in the scene out there can help with in some way or another. So a great message to share with the audience there. Just before we wrap, if people want to find out more about you, the work you're up to, find out more about your presentations and things you've done, where's the best place to find you and that information?
The best place to find me online is K3R3N3. I use the number 3 instead of the letter E. So K3R3N3.com. You can also find me on X.com, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook, although I'm almost never there, but you can definitely look for me.
That's great. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for on this adventure of Alice and Bob. A big thanks to our guest today, Keren. We live in a world where it's really easy to focus on the negatives and see a world of angry Karen memes on social media and evil hackers and ransomware around every corner. But maybe if we think a little bit less like Karens and all like Keren, we can strengthen the internet's immune system by educating and empowering a diverse range of people who can really make a difference out there. For those who haven't seen it, we'll include a link to the wonderful TED Talk, Hackers, the Internet's Immune System, in the show notes, as well as anything else we can link to there to help you watch that and share with others and help people understand how hacking can be a real force for good in society and really make a difference. As always, thanks to super producer Jesse and the team at BeyondTrust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.